Welcome to this week's episode of At the Boundary, the podcast from the Global and National Security Institute at the University of South Florida. I'm Glenn Beckman, your guest host today for At the Boundary. Joining us on today's episode will be Dr. Louise Tumchewics, an award-winning author and researcher for her work and writing on maritime economic security. But first, a couple of things we want to pass along pertaining to a pair of signature events GNSI will be hosting this spring. We'll start with the second one first, the International Security Experience, a 4-day event scheduled for April 14th through 17th. Now, we're partnering with King's Center for the Study of Intelligence at King's College London, along with the Intelligence and National Security Journal and USF's Intelligence and National Security Studies. We're excited to announce a new speaker to our lineup. David Marlow, former Deputy Director for Operations for the CIA, will be the keynote speaker on day one. Registration is now open, so reserve your seat today. That's about a month away. In just a couple of weeks, however, GNSI will be hosting Tampa Summit 6. Cracks in the Lamp, Freeing the Nuclear Genie will examine long dormant, but now resurrected fears and questions. The doomsday clock is closer to midnight than it has ever been. Are we on the verge of another nuclear age? You'll need to register to find out. We have an extraordinary lineup of speakers and experts, including retired Generals Frank McKenzie and John Hyten, former Special Assistant to the President Frank Miller, and former Assistant Secretary of State and 5-time Ambassador Christopher Hill. That's March 24th and 25th at the Marshall Student Center here at USF. There's no cost to attend either of these signature GNSI events, but registration is required. You know, since GNSI was created nearly 4 years ago, we've devoted a lot of time and resources to the Middle East, and more specifically, Iran. U.S. and Israeli airstrikes began on February 28th in Iran, and they continue today. Iran has struck back vigorously as well, with retaliatory strikes around the region. Now there are reports about potential uprisings by different groups inside and outside the country. We thought it might be useful for us to create a library of our work on Iran that's easy to find, all in one place, and that's exactly what we've done. Research articles, conference videos, media appearances, At the Boundary episodes, and other publications. You can find all of that in the library on our website. We'll have a link in the show notes. Finally, today we're excited to announce a new addition to the GNSI Board of Advisors. Joining us on our mission to inform, prepare, and enable is Bob Donahue. He's a USF alum and the founder and CEO of Bylight. They're headquartered in D.C. and have offices across the country. As a former Bull, Bob's pretty excited to be sharing his expertise and skill set with his alma mater. Okay, it's time now for our special guest today, Dr. Louise Tumchewics, a renowned author and researcher specializing in maritime economic security. Joining her today for the interview is Dr. Tad Schnaufer, the Strategy and Research Manager here at GNSI. Tumchewics recently was awarded the Admiral Castex Prize from the French Navy for her writing and work. She's also a research fellow at the Center of War Studies at the University of Southern Denmark. Let's drop in on their conversation today on At the Boundary.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Louise.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
We appreciate you calling in all the way from Denmark. We were talking before. What's one of your major projects you're working on at the Center for War Studies?
So, the Center for War Studies is alive with all kinds of activities. The project that I've been working on for the past almost 2 years has been an interdisciplinary project on cybersecurity, geopolitics, and supply chain resilience. So we've it's been a project between our Department of Business and Management Studies, the Department of Computer Science, and the Center for War Studies, which has actually worked really well. And we've been looking at cybersecurity threats emerging from geopolitical tensions, geopolitical shifts, and how that affects businesses in the Danish defense and technology sectors. So just for your to paint a picture for your listeners, the Danish defense and technology sectors has a lot of small to medium enterprises, which typically those businesses will be aware of cybersecurity threats, but don't necessarily have the resources or practices in place to be defending themselves against various cyber hazards.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably relatively universal. A lot of companies and industry members don't understand the complex variety of threats. So when you're talking about cyber threats, are you talking about state-sponsored threats, maybe a Russian threat, for example, or are you talking non-state, maybe criminal activities, or both?
Yeah, so we've been talking about both because there is, obviously criminally motivated cyber attacks, whether it's phishing or malware, ransomware, that has, sort of, I guess, a rather nefarious profit motive behind it. And then we're also seeing state-sponsored threats, which of course can draw upon the resources of a state to have sort of persistent cyber aggression.
And what are companies? Let me rephrase. How are companies reacting to that, particularly, obviously, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and the heightened security environment that Europe's currently operating in?
Well, I think certainly the Danish national security cybersecurity strategy, which came out in 2024, is really a reflection of the fact that many businesses in Denmark, government organizations and individuals are aware of cyber risks. So Denmark is a highly digitized country. When I first moved here, that was a bit of a shock to the system. I can do virtually anything from an app on my phone. Wow. And all my interaction with public agencies is digital. So if I want to make a doctor's appointment, I do that on a website. If I'm getting information about my income tax returns, that all comes to me digitally. So as you can imagine, for any individuals in Denmark, there's a lot of very important confidential information out there in cyberspace, and the same for businesses. So there is that awareness, but there aren't necessarily the practices in place that are keeping up with cyber threats.
And what type of practices are we talking about? Just dual authentication for accounts and, updating, patchworks for software? Or what specifically are we looking at?
So, yeah, things like that, like dual factor identification, using passwords that are stronger than password one. Even, making sure that everyone in an organization knows what a phishing email might look like, and testing that kind of awareness. Doing things like patches in software. We when we were doing our consultative workshops, we went out to visit a number of businesses, and some of them had stories of an IT consultant moving between businesses and using the same USB stick.
That's easy not a good idea.
An easy not to do. Yeah. So practices like that, practices that are often driven by convenience, by complacency, sort of a perception like, oh, we're a small business, we're not that important. And then also we're Denmark, and again, as a North American, this was quite surprising. Denmark is a very high trust society. So cybersecurity in a high trust environment is different when people sort of assume the best, or assume that that the things will be secure and safe.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we see that there's hostile actors out there, so you can't always take that jovial approach, I guess.
Yes. So even though in my own experience, for example, I once left a bag on a train and it was very nicely returned to me.
Wow. Yeah.
But in cyberspace, that sort of thing is not necessarily going to happen.
And with highly digitized societies, obviously in the United States, it's maybe a little less so than some of the smaller European nations. I'm thinking as well as with like Estonia, where almost even your identifications are online, like your driver's license, everything is just online. But what risk does that pose to particularly a state-sponsored cyber attack if all your systems are attacked either with some form of denial of service? It doesn't even necessarily need to be pulling information. It just shuts down a government site for a time. How would that impact day-to-day life, and what are some of the repercussions?
Well, I think if that happened here in Denmark, it would quite dramatically bring society to a standstill. So if I want to buy a train ticket, for example, 99% of the time, I'm going to do that from an app.
Yeah.
And even if I'm buying it in the station and getting a paper ticket, it's a card payment.
Yeah.
Logging into websites, that's all online. Doing any kind of banking, we very rarely use cash here. So if there was anything like a denial of service attack, you could imagine that life would slow down very quickly, and it would be very difficult for people to do even the most basic, conduct even the most basic business, or you do the most elementary things of normal day-to-day life.
Right, and likely that would cause some civil unrest and kind of start spiraling, especially as if the attack was a prolonged disruption of online services.
Well, I would say that even as polite and cooperative as Danish society is, yes, you could see that within a few days, when people start having difficulties, say accessing funds or getting from place to place, or even being able to have food in their homes, that people very quickly relationships start to break down.
Yeah. Well, and this is one of the big concerns about some countries looking to go to even a cashless society, because everything's online. Then if you don't even have cash as an option, if something should happen, even if it's not nefarious, it's just, there's a big storm or a power outage or something.
Absolutely. Even if there was something that happened, not necessarily from a hostile actor, but simply by, a major storm or some sort of environmental event, suddenly a cashless society is very, very vulnerable. So in early 2024, I believe, the Danish government encouraged Danes to have 72 hours worth of supplies in their homes to prepare for that kind of eventuality. Now, I would say that Danes are probably a bit more relaxed about that than our friends over in Finland or Sweden, who are encouraged to have a week's worth of provisions, and in countries like Finland, which has been much more robust in its civil defense preparations for a very long time.
Now, I know Finland, Sweden, Poland recently as well have produced pamphlets for their citizens of, just that type of guidance. Like, you should store this much food, you should have this much, cash on hand, you should watch out for these type of cyber attacks. Is Denmark also publishing? I think for example, in Sweden, it's called the total defense, aspects, or comprehensive security in Finland. Does Denmark have anything like that for its citizens, like a pamphlet that describes how to prepare?
So I can say that I have not actually received a pamphlet, but
digitally,
we do have it. We do have it on a website.
Well, yeah. Hopefully, you had to print that out. You have to have the analog hard copy just in case.
Exactly, and I think getting that analog hard copy, that's quite a shift. Again, a shift in behaviors and a shift in culture.
So what are some of the other vulnerabilities we might not think of? I mean, obviously we've talked about kind of the big stuff, banking and day-to-day life, but what are some of the other vulnerabilities within companies or maybe within the defense industry that kind of get overlooked when we talk about cybersecurity or also just general hybrid threats from state actors?
So one thing, just to give your listeners some background, as part of this project, we held workshops with Danish small to medium enterprises involved in defense and in the technology sector. We held them around the country, and that was an opportunity for them to share about some of the threats they have. We used some scenarios to get them thinking about different threats and about what their response would be. And there were things that we wouldn't necessarily think of, especially for those of us coming from a political science background like me, you don't think about necessarily some of the supply chain management problems that would cause. So even if there's a cybersecurity breach, not even necessarily within a business, but with their supplier 2 to 3 to 4 steps removed, that could really negatively impact business, how you could get some of the materials that you need, or even just the flow of money amongst businesses for various services, and just the cascading effects that could have.
What is, from all those workshops, what are one or two really interesting or kind of facts that you found out that you really found that was shocking? Either that maybe companies didn't know or things they were doing. What was something that really took you aback from those workshops?
So I think, we had a really, in some ways, we had a really great experience with these workshops because businesses were so forthcoming about the challenges that they have faced in the past, their current practices, and challenges that they envisage in the future. I think one of the things that probably surprised me the most is what you and I and probably many of our listeners who were interested in this kind of, were interested in geopolitics, were following geopolitical developments, but many people are not. And they are not necessarily seeing the connection between a geopolitical event that's happening somewhere else in the world and the implications that it could have for their business. And I think we tend to think of cyberspace as something that's removed from us, and that our activities within cyberspace are sort of discrete and confined to our circle of activity. When really there's so much international connectivity that it doesn't matter if that geopolitical actor is on the other side of the world.
Right.
The impact that they can have on a business through a cyber attack, for example, could be immediate.
Yeah, and again, it could be a threat from across the ocean. It's a lot easier to travel through cyberspace than physical space. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that that threat perception, that just because something is a threat and it feels geographically far away, that isn't necessarily the case with cyber threats.
Well, and as you mentioned, the threat perception in Denmark has been increasing since 2022. You noted the cyber strategy published in 2024, but also just last year, Denmark had a number of drones that were over its airports. It shut down, I think, Copenhagen Airport, things like that. So I imagine the Danes are feeling a little bit more pressure just generally, which maybe does that translate over to the cyber domain?
I think, yes, absolutely. Denmark had unexpectedly found itself in, feeling those hybrid threats a lot closer with the drone incidents last autumn. And that was certainly something that was very, I would say, unnerving, particularly for Danish politicians, Danish leadership, and definitely brought home the realities of hybrid threats. And that's a realization that I would say has been growing, particularly since 2022. But when it was on the doorstep and when it was at Copenhagen Airport, then that really brought it into people's day-to-day life.
Well, and where are you seeing the lack of readiness, whether we're looking at the government or industry? Where are they lacking readiness? Is it just a simple, not necessarily complacency, but just this lack of threat perception? Or what are the other areas that we're seeing the readiness not up to par?
Well, I think there is a growing awareness of the dangers of hybrid threats. What I think is challenging is that readiness requires preparation. And typically preparation requires time. And so it's, and changing habits, changing the way that we do things. And one of the challenges, I think, is to encourage preparation and encourage readiness without encouraging panic or a disproportionate sense of danger. And getting that, getting that readiness in a calm and orderly fashion takes a lot of time.
Because you want to amp up the threat to motivate people to be ready.
Exactly. You want to amp up the threat to motivate people to be ready, but not amp up the threat so much that people are engaging in panic motivated behaviors. Whether it's hoarding, whether it's stashing loads of cash under the mattress, or whether it is actually, over securitizing normal functions in life, so that, for example, it's almost impossible to use an app because you're so busy authenticating yourself.
Right. So a little bit of measured security, not just overwhelming it.
Exactly. And I think because day-to-day life in Denmark has not changed very much, even with there being a war on the European continent, even with there being concerns over hybrid threats coming from the Baltic Sea and around the North Sea area, day-to-day life in Denmark kind of proceeds at its normal, pleasant pace. So that makes it, I think, often difficult for people to understand the reality or the proximity of the threat.
Right.
And it makes it difficult for people to think about preparation.
Right. Well, and it makes an event like a 0-day type of event even more likely because people just aren't even looking for a possible, attack vector.
Yeah. Well, and while there has been definitely encouragement of, getting people to prepare, getting people to think about it, that is a cultural shift that needs time and that needs consistent messaging and measured changes in behavior.
Unfortunately, a lot of times we see with this, whether if it's this type of, cybersecurity or other forms of military preparedness or resiliency, it normally takes unfortunately, a devastating event to kind of shock people into, preparation, being motivated to prepare. Is that kind of what we might see here?
I think so. I think that's in no way limited to Denmark. I think that's very typical human behavior. And that was, I think, sort of encapsulated by one of our, a business that shared their experience with a cyber attack in one of our workshops. So they hadn't really thought about cybersecurity. And then they were victims of a ransomware attack for a week, which reduced them to pen and paper operations, and, manual spreadsheets and things like that. And after that experience, then they have been far more conscious of cybersecurity. But it took a total shutdown in order to change their practices and change their threat perception.
Well, that sounds like a pretty devastating attack. And I recall back in 2017 timeframe, the Danish shipping giant Maersk was attacked by a software virus that cost them a couple $100 million.
That's right. In 2017, Maersk was a victim of the NotPetya ransomware attack that looked like ransomware, but was later, believed, attributed by U.S. intelligence to a Russian state source. And that was, a crippling incident for Maersk. Maersk is a Danish shipping company, but it does have operations all around the world. So a cyber attack actually paralyzed 76 port terminals.
Wow.
Yeah. And it affected over 45,000 PCs and 4,000 servers. So this was, a huge incident.
Yeah.
And probably cost the company in the neighborhood of $250 to $300 million to recover from.
Wow. I mean, it just drives home that impact. And actually going back to your earlier comments about other companies that you work with, whether they're vendors or consultants or software companies that you might purchase items from, that attack was, if I remember correctly, was related to the tax accounting software that they had purchased through an outside vendor. So it's not even your systems that are being attacked. It's being introduced into your systems from a third-party source.
Absolutely. And I think that was one thing that came out through this project was just that awareness of how, cybersecurity practices in a business can be strong and can be robust. But the problem can actually come 2 or 3 steps removed from your own business. So that whole supply chain has to be cyber secure.
Yeah. And, going back to the education piece, you want to make sure the human factor is up to par as well, that you don't have a random employee somewhere in your company click on a link and that compromises your system.
Absolutely. Something everyone in the business, even if they're not directly involved in IT, needs to know what phishing might look like, what to look for, and also the practices to implement in their daily interactions with cyberspace and digital tools to be on guard for suspicious activity or something that looks not quite right. Or something that looks too good to be true.
Right. And as you continue with this project over the next several months, what are the big things you're going to be looking at? So you have this input from the workshops, you have what you're writing on. What are we looking forward to as the project continues? What exactly are you going to focus on with these cyber threats?
So we're at that exciting stage of the project where we're writing up all our findings and writing up our recommendations. We'll be sharing that at conferences. We'll be sharing that in a few publications. Hopefully that's stuff that we can also share with the GNSI community as well, because I think there's lots of overlaps between the projects that have been ongoing on critical infrastructure. So we're going to be sharing those. We have a big sort of wrap up conference towards the end of April to share all our learning. And what we're hoping is that from our findings in the project, businesses will find some actionable guidance that they can implement. And that we can hopefully see within Denmark some resources dedicated to helping small to medium enterprises tackle the challenge of improving cybersecurity.
So could you give us a sneak peek of one of the findings that you're thinking would have a big impact, just briefly?
So I think one of the findings was that a lot of businesses do not have a response plan for a cyber attack. Now, most businesses, of course, will have a plan in place for, what happens if there's a fire or a flood or physical theft on their premises. But very few have a plan in place for, what happens in minute one after a cyber attack.
Right. Who do you call? And then what happens if your phones are offline and you can't call anyone?
And you can't call it. Do you just shut everything down? Do you just pull the plug? What do you do? Yeah. Who do you call? What are the steps to take to contain that attack if you can?
Well, and that's a great point. That's something even, obviously companies, militaries, and governments have to look at, because even if your response is to, we better shut everything down so they don't steal all the information, well, maybe the overall goal of the attack was to shut your systems down. So your response is actually achieving the goal of the attack if you're looking at a denial of service attack or something like that, for example. So that's a really complex thing that companies, governments, and militaries will have to continue to look at.
Exactly. It's not going to be something as straightforward as, the cyber equivalent of stop, drop, and roll. So it will be a multifaceted kind of response plan.
And then, as you look at that, who do you call does a company have a requirement to call the government, let them know, hey, we've suffered a major cyber attack. We need to coordinate our efforts maybe with either government entities or law enforcement, or could they I guess just try to handle it themselves?
So there is a cyber hotline for digital security in Denmark, and that aims to provide advice on digital security, digital fraud, and cyber attacks. And it will try to give, will give some preventative guidance, and it will try to provide some advice on how to handle an incident. And for businesses, it helps to provide companies that believe they're experiencing a ransomware attack, or maybe something like fraudulent invoicing. And then through that hotline, businesses or individuals can get advice on, do they go to the police?
That's interesting, because that's one of the things that we deal with through some of the projects we work with in conjunction with one of our sister organizations here at the University of South Florida, the Cyber Florida. As we look at cyber threats, how do you actually report it to ensure other companies learn maybe or other companies or entities, it could just be agencies, learn the lessons and see, okay, we need to recognize this type of thing as an attack or as ransomware, or just, hey, you don't want to get exposed. You don't want to expose your systems to this. These systems are compromised, those type of things.
Yeah, and I think that sharing is really important. Again, this isn't something that you could typically be undertaken by, say, a policing organization, because police forces aren't best resourced to do that. But I think that element of sharing, this has been flagged up in a number of businesses, that is really important. And that is something that needs to be not only provided by the state, and that is done to an extent, but it has to be part of business activity, both actually not just for businesses, also for individuals. That we're checking those things and we're aware of them.
Well, I wonder if there needs to be a government agency, at the state level, the Danish level, or even here in the United States, for example, that really helps coordinate between companies and then also other government agencies that suffer cyber attacks. Because you imagine with a profit-driven company, they probably wouldn't want to advertise very widely that they've been attacked, compromising huge systems, costing them hundreds of millions of dollars, obviously for the sake of their stockholders or shareholders. So they might not have the incentive to share that. And I think that's where maybe we need some sort of legal framework, not just to get the lessons learned, but also to ensure they are actually observed.
I would agree. I think particularly for businesses, there isn't much incentive to report a cyber attack, because you don't want to damage consumer confidence. It's not a good sign to say, like, hey, we've had a cyber attack and interacting with us.
Yeah. And your information's gone. Yeah, so all of our customer information's gone. Yeah,
and we can see the reputational damage that businesses have suffered. So, for instance, in the UK last year, Marks and Spencer's, which is a well-known grocery store chain, suffered a an 8-week-long cyber attack that was believed to have stolen a lot of customer information. So you can imagine that really depletes customer confidence. One, when they can't place orders because of the cyber attack, and then when they learn that their personal information may have been compromised.
Yeah, no, it definitely gives you a moment of pause of how often you throw your information into the into the internet.
Yes, but I do think having reporting mechanisms that again, where there is a legal obligation, so it has to be done, and then where there is some lessons, a lessons extraction process, even if businesses are anonymized, but to make sure that others are aware of a threat.
Yeah, and one of the other things is we look at cyber threats, and as you continue and with your project, and hopefully we'll look forward to reading that report soon, is just the evolving nature of cyber attacks and threats. That you have a certain type of virus that does a certain action this time, and then something completely new, these 0-day ideas, something you knew you couldn't even anticipate has been developed and is unleashed in your system.
Absolutely. And I think that is only going to, the challenge of that is only going to increase with the development of artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence driven cyber attacks. And I think then it's very important both for individuals and businesses to start to think, okay, if we can't prevent everything, statistically, it's just going to be impossible to prevent everything. What does a recovery plan look like?
Yeah, exactly. Going back, how do you respond?
How do we make sure that we can restore operations?
Well, with the report, when can we expect to see that out?
So we have the project has its sort of final conference on the 29th of April, just in case anybody's in Copenhagen and wants to join in. And then we hope to have things published and available looking towards the end of June.
Excellent. Well, we all look forward to giving that a read and looking forward to those findings, and hopefully we get to cooperate in the future.
Absolutely. I feel like this will be a continuing conversation on the challenges of cyber threats.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
Special thanks to our guest today, Dr. Louise Tumchewics, award-winning author and researcher on maritime economic security. And thanks as well to Dr. Tad Schnaufer, the strategy and research manager at GNSI. By the way, Tad recently launched a new Substack channel, The Pursuit of Security. His most recent piece is Peace in Ukraine. What will it look like? We'll have a link in the show notes. You should check it out. Next week on the podcast, our special guest will be Heather Williams, the director of the Project on Nuclear Issues at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. She's a senior fellow at CSIS and the author of a recently published commentary titled 3 Truths About the End of New START and What It Means for Strategic Competition. New START was the last remaining bilateral nuclear arms control agreement between the U.S. and Russia. We're going to talk to her about her article and what the future may bring. If you don't want to miss that episode or any other episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. We know you have many different options when it comes to choosing a podcast. We just want to say thanks today for spending a few minutes with us. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and let your friends and colleagues know and tell them to subscribe as well. You can follow GNSI on our LinkedIn and X accounts at USF_GNSI. We're also on YouTube. Plus, we publish a newsletter the first Wednesday of every month. We invite you to subscribe to that as well. That's going to wrap up this episode of At the Boundary. Each new episode will feature global and national security issues we found to be worthy of attention and discussion. I'm Glenn Beckman. Thanks for listening today. We'll see you next week at the Boundary.